The three of us got into the same car. My divorce hearing was scheduled for 9:30 a.m. My husband and his mistress were going to get married right after that. But only I was the one who walked away unharmed. Karma arrived earlier than the court did. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing from our global family. And if this is your first time here, don't forget to subscribe. Your support helps us share more true stories of betrayal, justice, and rebirth. Now, sit back and listen. I sat in the back seat of the sleek black Mercedes, clutching the beige leather handbag Brian had bought me during our trip to Italy 3 years ago. Back then, he called it a gift for his perfect woman. Now, it was just an old accessory stuffed with divorce papers and the remnants of a broken marriage. Today was the day. Me, my husband Brian Kane, and Linda Thompson, his mistress, were heading to civil court to end everything. The divorce hearing would begin at 9:30 a.m. After that, Brian and Linda were set to get married immediately. After all, she was already 7 months pregnant. That perfectly round belly under her pale pink maternity dress couldn't be hidden anymore. This was the textbook definition of a shotgun wedding, a rushed ceremony because of the baby. I didn't sue Brian for infidelity, even though my heart once boiled with rage. The reason was simple. The settlement he offered was too generous, including alimony that would allow me to live comfortably without having to return to work anytime soon. Sometimes, money is the most practical justice a woman like me can hold on to. The car hummed smoothly down the highway toward downtown, the engine purring like a whisper. Brian was driving, his right hand steady on the wheel, his left occasionally stroking Linda's hand resting on his thigh. She sat in the passenger seat, her golden hair cascading over her shoulders, lips glossed into a smug smile. I watched them through the rearview mirror, feeling like an unwilling spectator in the romantic drama. Linda's belly jutted forward, and I couldn't help but think of the reason I was even here. Infertility. The doctors had said it was my issue, and Brian had used that as an excuse to run into Linda's arms. "If you could have given me a child, things would have been different," he once said, his voice dripping with fake regret. Now, looking at that pregnant stomach, all I felt was a vague sadness, mixed with a strange relief that this would soon be over. But then, halfway to court, the calm shattered. It started with a conversation about their upcoming wedding, and just like that, they began arguing right in front of me. The issue? Linda insisted on using dusty pink roses for the wedding. Brian, with his selective hearing, misunderstood and thought she meant pink paper roses. The 3D render just came in, and the effect looked like a funeral. "Brian, are you out of your mind? Who uses paper roses for a wedding? Are you doing this to upset me on purpose?" Her voice rose, sharp and echoing through the tight space. Brian's face tensed, his grip on the wheel tightened, and the car jerked slightly as he snapped, "Why are you yelling?" "It was just a misunderstanding. We can fix it, okay?" His face flushed, not from embarrassment, but from the anger rising in him. Linda didn't back down. "Misunderstanding. Do you ever actually listen to anything I say? You're always like this, never really paying attention to me." Her tears started streaming, mascara smudging like ink stains. Brian sighed, voice strained. "Okay, I get it. It's a mistake. What do you want me to do? I'm driving." The fight escalated into a chaotic symphony, her yelling, his growling. I sat in the back seat, leaning against the soft leather, and then Linda suddenly turned to me, voice trembling, pleading, "Emily, please tell him." "Do you think it's easy for me? I'm being called a homewrecker while carrying his baby. I just asked for one small thing, and he doesn't even care. What's the point of this marriage then? Her face flushed red, hands protectively cradling her belly like it was some fragile treasure. I looked into her teary eyes and felt something unexpected. Not jealousy, but a strange mix of pity and bitterness. I smiled faintly, voice soft. Yes, yes, yes. It's all his fault. Don't get upset. It's not good for the baby. Brian heard that, and his face darkened further. You think I don't care? Who do you think I'm working myself to death for every day? It was one small misunderstanding. Do you have to keep bringing it up? He sounded like a sulking child. I turned to him, still calm. Providing for the family isn't easy. I did take away 3 of your houses, after all. Linda's pregnant. Maybe try cutting her some slack. I wasn't mediating because I cared about them, but because I was worried. If this escalated further, the court hearing might be delayed, and I'd have to wait even longer to get out of this marriage. To keep things from spiraling, I offered, Linda, why don't you come sit in the back? Take a breath. Don't bother with this idiot. Linda slowly moved to the back seat. I switched to the front. As soon as she sat down, she started ranting again. It's all your fault. If you could have had kids, I wouldn't be suffering like this now. That sentence was a dagger to the heart. I froze, eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. These 2 garbage humans, one a mistress, the other a cheating husband, and they still found a way to blame me. I thought to myself, fury bubbling beneath the surface. They say bad people will get what's coming to them. If karma has eyes, then let it strike now. Bam! A deafening crash exploded, followed by a blinding white flash. My ears rang for seconds. The world blurred like a nightmare. The airbag slammed into my face, stinging sharply. But all I could think was, an accident! Brian's car had crashed into a large truck. From the truck's bed, a steel rod, meters long, about 7 to 8 centimeters thick, came flying down like a spear from hell. In a flash, it pierced straight through the windshield. The rod drove through Brian's right chest, tore through the driver's seat, and skewered Linda's belly in the back. And me? Because I'd just moved to the front passenger seat, I only got hit by the airbag. Painful and dizzying, but nothing serious. I sat there, staring at the horrifying scene in front of me. My name is Emily Hayes. I'm 29 years old, and I teach math at a local middle school. My job is simple. Every day I stand at the chalkboard, drawing out balanced equations, explaining to kids how everything in mathematics follows logic and has a solution. But my life is nothing like that. It's messy, off balance, and there's no equation that could solve it. 5 years ago, I married Brian Kane, a handsome businessman with a silver tongue who constantly promised me a future full of children and happiness. I was 24 then, still naive enough to believe that love alone could build a whole life. But reality was far harsher. The years went by, one after another, and I still wasn't pregnant. No crying babies, no little footsteps. I started to worry. My mother-in-law, Evelyn Kane, a bony woman with tightly pinned silver hair and razor-sharp eyes, was the first to voice her criticism. She lived only a few blocks away from us, but it felt like she was camped out in my kitchen. Every visit, she'd stare at my stomach, lips pursed, before spitting out some biting remark. Evelyn refused to let me go to a reputable hospital where real doctors and modern equipment could actually help. No need, she said, shaking her head. I know a good doctor at a fertility clinic across town. Recommended by a friend. He's very experienced. She was so forceful that I had no choice. That doctor, a frail old man with thick glasses and a gravelly voice, came to our house to examine both of us. I tried every method I could to get pregnant. Those daily hormone supplements tasted as bitter as my growing disappointment. I tracked my menstrual cycles on the Flow app, marked every ovulation day, scheduled sex like a complex math problem. But I still didn't conceive. Every time the test strip showed a single line, it felt like my heart was being crushed. I didn't trust that old doctor, so I secretly went to a big hospital for proper testing. The results came back normal. My hormone levels were fine. My corpus luteum was healthy. My cycles ran like clockwork. The doctor smiled and patted my shoulder. "You're perfectly fine, Emily." Nothing to worry about. I brought the paper home, hands trembling as I handed it to Brian, my voice pleading. "See? I'm okay. Maybe the issue is with you. We should get you checked too." But Brian's face turned red with anger. He threw the paper onto the table. "You're blaming me now? I'm perfectly healthy. You're the one who needs to try harder." He stormed out of the room, leaving me sitting there, gripping the now crumpled paper in my hands. We kept going back and forth like that for months, fights looping on repeat, shouting that echoed through the house, followed by long stretches of silence that felt like a curse. Everything finally exploded the day Brian showed up at my door with Linda, a young woman, visibly pregnant. They stood there in the doorway, Brian's arm wrapped around her shoulders, his voice flat like he was commenting on the weather. "Emily, I'm sorry, but Linda is pregnant with my child. I don't have any problems." I stood frozen, my hand gripping the doorframe until my knuckles turned white, my heart shattering. He used her belly as proof, as a weapon. My rage blended with heartbreak. I laid down the terms for our divorce. 3 of the houses would go to me, and he'd be left with just a portion of the cash. Half an hour after the crash, the shrill wails of police sirens echoed through the air, mingled with the howls of fire trucks and ambulances, all rushing in like metallic beasts, sealing off half the road. Smoke still billowed thick from the truck's engine. I sat by the roadside wrapped in an emergency blanket, shivering. My face must have been pale, eyes vacant, staring into nothing, as if my soul were still trapped somewhere inside that wrecked car. People gathered around, the trembling truck driver, a few curious onlookers who had stopped their cars. Some tried to comfort me. One hand gently patted my shoulder. "Are you okay?" I only nodded, clutching the blanket tighter. "Are you Emily Hayes?" a young police officer asked, stepping closer with a notepad in hand, his tone serious but sympathetic. I nodded again, my throat dry as sandpaper. He jotted a few notes and asked, "The 2 people injured in the car, what's their relationship to you?" I took a deep breath, forcing my voice to stay steady. "The man is my husband, Brian Kane. The woman, the baby in her belly, belongs to my husband." The officer's expression hardened instantly, brows raising as he studied me like a suspect. "Ms. Hayes, you do know that surrogacy contracts are legal in California, right?" I froze, jaw dropping. Then I pointed toward the twisted wreck a few meters away, where Brian and Linda were still trapped, and snapped, voice shaking with fury. "Look at them! Clinging to each other like lovers, living and dying together. Does that look like a surrogacy contract to you? They're fiancés and lovers!" From inside the car came faint groans, slicing through the already suffocating air. Linda, face ghost white, eyes brimming with tears, clutched her swollen belly, trembling, moaning. "It hurts! Please! Save me! Save me first!" Her voice broke with desperation, like a wounded animal begging for life. Brian, his right chest pierced clean through by the steel rod, his white shirt soaked in red, gasped painfully, shouting hoarsely, "Don't move! God damn it, don't move! Do you hear me? I'm in agony too. Help! Somebody help me first!" His face contorted in agony. Then an older officer approached, square-jawed, silver mustache, his expression grave like a judge presiding over a verdict. "All right," he said. "We've got a serious problem here." You may have to decide it turned out the rescue team had hit an impossible situation. The steel rod, thick as my wrist, had skewered both of them in a horrific way, through Brian's right lung, piercing the driver's seat, and straight into Linda's abdomen. The rescuers explained urgently, pointing to the injuries. Brian's right lung was punctured. blood flooding his chest cavity. Linda's wound likely affected her liver and spleen, and the fetus's condition was uncertain. The fetal heartbeat was irregular. If they saved Brian first, they'd have to cut the rod near his seat. But that kind of force would twist the other end inside Linda's body, shredding her organs, and the baby wouldn't survive. If they saved Linda first, they couldn't just cut it. The only way would be to detach Brian's body from the rod without further damage, but doing that would leave a gaping hole in his chest, causing pulmonary arterial pressure to spike. He'd die instantly. It was a real-life paradox, a problem with no solution, and the rescue team stood frozen. "Emily!" Brian's voice cracked, his eyes full of pleading, lips trembling, hand twitching weakly in the air. "Help me," he whispered. "Emily, please, save me. Save me too. I still have my baby." Linda sobbed, her voice trembling, and in her despair there flickered something primal. Maternal instinct, a mother fighting for her child's life, her hands clutching her belly protectively. Seconds ticked by like hours, their blood pressure dropping, breathing weakening, and still the rescuers couldn't decide. Then suddenly, all eyes turned to me, as if I were the judge holding the final say. I pulled my phone out of my purse, my hands shaking as I dialed. Let me call someone for advice first," I told the officer. I tried calling my mother-in-law. 2 rings, then hung up. Tried again. Busy. "Looks like she's blocked my number," I said with a bitter half-smile. I remembered Brian once saying his parents were on vacation in Europe, not returning until next Monday. Their phones were probably on airplane mode. Maybe I could try Brian's phone instead? Fighting down disgust, I stepped toward the wreck, searching through his blood-soaked pockets for the phone. Just as I unlocked it, an incoming call popped up. It was from the wedding planner. I answered. A cheerful female voice came through. "Mr. Kane? We're just calling to confirm the floral arrangements for the wedding." I gave her my suggestion, my voice calm and steady. "For Mr. Kane and Miss Thompson's wedding. I think you'd better go with paper flowers." I saw the light fade from Brian's eyes in real time. His face twisted, and a mouthful of blood gushed out, splattering down the steel rod. At the same moment, the 2 paramedics near the back seat screamed in panic. "The pregnant woman's seizing!" "We need to act now!" The officer snatched the phone from my hand, immediately cutting the call with the wedding company, and tried to reach their families instead. But Linda's family wasn't local, and Brian's parents were still in the air, completely unreachable. Tears welled in my eyes as I looked at the rescuers, their faces tight with concentration, sweat dripping down their temples. Finally, I took a deep breath and spoke softly. Maybe just let them go together. Help them. Leave peacefully, without pain. Everyone went silent, staring at me like I'd lost my mind. The officer who seemed to be the captain, a tall man with a heavy mustache and stern face, spoke firmly. "Ms. Hayes, I understand your feelings, but these are human lives. This isn't something to joke about." I nodded, my tone calm, almost detached. "You're right. It's not something to take lightly." "So, let's make it fair then. Flip a coin?" The officer blinked, speechless, gripping his radio tight, as if he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. I remembered someone once said the meaning of flipping a coin is that when it's in the air, you'll suddenly realize what you truly want. I thought to myself, the person who said that must have never been in a situation where their cheating husband and his mistress were drowning together, or, in this case, skewered by the same steel rod. By the time the rescue team finally decided to act, the air at the crash site had become even more suffocating. The high-pitched screech of the metal saw sliced through the deathly silence like the wail of death itself. They chose to save Linda first, because the fetal heartbeat was becoming erratic. The police captain looked at me, his voice heavy. "Emily, we'll try to separate the steel rod from Brian's body first, but the risk is extremely high." I nodded, gripping the emergency blanket so tightly that my fingernails dug into my skin, thinking to myself, risk. This whole life is already a gamble, they began. The saw whirred, the steel bar trembled with each cut, and blood spurted from Brian's wound like a fountain, staining the asphalt red. Brian let out a wrenching scream, his face twisted in agony. But in the end, he couldn't escape his fate. He lost too much blood. His body convulsed a few more times, then went still. His breath stopped. His eyes remained wide open, staring up at the gray sky, as if accusing fate itself. Linda was pulled out of the car, her face pale as paper, still cradling her belly, moaning weakly, "My baby! Save my baby!" They rushed her onto a stretcher, the ambulance tearing off down the road. On the way to the hospital, the officer later told me, Linda suffered a brain hemorrhage due to pregnancy complications. The doctors fought to save her for 3 hours, but she didn't make it. The 7-month-old fetus was delivered via emergency C-section, a tiny baby boy, weighing barely 1.4 kilograms, wrinkled and red, immediately placed in the neonatal intensive care unit, surrounded by tubes and monitors in an incubator. I arrived at the hospital later, my feet dragging through the cold, white-tiled hallway, the smell of disinfectant making my head spin. At the reception desk, a doctor stopped me, holding a sheet of itemized medical costs, his voice flat. "Ms. Hayes, we need you to pay the hospital fees for the baby." I stood frozen, utterly stunned. "Excuse me? You're asking me to pay for the baby of my husband and his mistress?" My face must have looked awful, eyes wide with fury. A nurse nearby, a middle-aged woman with neatly tied hair and tired eyes, looked at me briefly, then replied blandly, "Oh, sorry to bother you." "We're just following protocol." Her tone was as casual as talking about the weather, but there was a flicker of pity in her eyes. I stood outside the NICU, staring through the blurry glass. Inside, the newborn, barely the size of my palm, lay inside the incubator, its tiny chest rising and falling under a thin blanket, heart monitor beeping steadily. I couldn't help but sigh. I turned to the nurse, my voice tired. "Linda's family won't get here until tomorrow. Talk to them instead. As for my ex-husband, we'll cremate him for now. After all, I'm still legally his wife." I had all the paperwork, so the entire process went smoothly that afternoon. He died in the afternoon. The cremation was scheduled for the next morning. It's not that I was heartless toward Brian's parents. They were the ones who blocked my number. I tried calling a few times, but the calls rang out unanswered. When I got home, I immediately called my mom. When I told her Brian was dead, she responded flatly, "Well, after the divorce, he might as well be dead." I croaked, voice raspy. "No, not just dead figuratively, dead dead." Biologically, my mom went silent for 3 seconds, a heavy pause over the line. Then she burst out laughing, loud and clear like a release. "Emily, don't tell your father yet." The doctor said no emotional shocks after his surgery. I nodded, even though she couldn't see it, my voice weary. "Yeah." Let me finish dealing with the assets first. My dad's illness was triggered by the canes, made him so angry he ended up in the hospital. Ever since Linda got pregnant, Brian and his mom went around smearing my name on Facebook, accusing me of being infertile, saying I tricked their family from the beginning. To force me into divorce, they even came to the school where I taught. Then they showed up at my father's company, causing a scene. He got so furious he had a heart attack. I gritted my teeth and had a lawyer draft a lawsuit, sue them for defamation and emotional distress. Seeing I was serious, the Kane family finally backed down and apologized. They agreed to the asset division, 3 houses to me, and they'd only keep the cash, just to finalize the divorce peacefully. Yes, I may have looked cold, detached, standing at the crash site today with no expression, eyes dry as I watched Brian's body covered in a white sheet. The police, firefighters, and medical staff were all professionals, calm, focused, working quickly, because that's what their jobs required. Save lives, not judge. But did anyone know? Before I saw Brian's body go cold, his skin pale, his blood dried up, I had already watched my own heart freeze little by little. I was once a bright girl, full of hope about marriage, believing in forever love. But what did I get in return? Dismissive remarks from Brian like, "Stop nagging, I'm tired," after every argument. His cruel selfishness, walking away when I cried. A marriage filled with endless petty fights. A toxic family culture, and his sickening dependence on his mother. It was his family that tore my dream of a home to shreds, forcing me to finally call it quits. Life, sometimes, is fair in the most brutal way. Lying on the huge bed in the pitch-black bedroom, blankets tangled around me, I stared up at the ceiling. This room used to be where we shared countless nights. Brian would hold me from behind and whisper sweet, cheesy nothings. "You're my everything, Emily." And now, thinking about the man I once loved so deeply, once shared a bed with, now dead, reduced to ashes in some cold urn somewhere, I felt an unbearable restlessness. My heart pounded, not from sadness, but from a strange emptiness, as if my body was rebelling against the sudden silence. I tossed and turned, clutching the bedsheet until it wrinkled, kicked off the blankets, beads of sweat forming on my forehead, even though the AC was blasting. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I crawled out of bed, bare feet hitting the icy wooden floor, and stumbled out of the room. Into the kitchen, made myself a bowl of instant noodles, ate and drank until I finally felt a little better. Turns out I was just hungry, I scoffed at myself. People tend to overcomplicate things, but sometimes all it takes is a bowl of noodles. This summer, I didn't have to work. It was summer break, the long holiday for teachers, a time for relaxing, reading, or traveling. But this summer had turned into a chaotic whirlwind. When Brian was cremated, I was still fast asleep, exhausted after a full day at the hospital and funeral home, sleeping so deeply that the phone ringing didn't even wake me. When I finally opened my eyes, the sun was already high. I rubbed them and picked up my phone to see a missed call from the funeral service. I called back. The man on the line spoke in a steady, professional tone. They asked whether I wanted to pick up the remains in person or have them shipped. They also asked which urn design I preferred, what size, what material. I went to collect the ashes that morning, driving through familiar streets. At the funeral home, a staff member handed me a gray ceramic urn, heavy in my hands, smooth and polished, like some soulless home decor. I took it to the beach, stood on the soft white sand, sea wind whipping through my hair, the salty air sharp in my nose. I opened the urn. The ashes caught the breeze, drifting out into the rolling waves. I whispered, "Goodbye, Brian." The ashes vanished quickly, like faded memories, leaving me there, toes buried in damp sand, feeling light, but empty. That afternoon, I went to the lawyer's office. Frank Douglas's office was on the 5th floor of a sleek glass building, air cold from the AC, the faint smell of paper and coffee in the air. He was recommended by a former student of mine. Frank was young, about 30, neatly trimmed brown hair, wearing a well-fitted gray suit, bright face with an eager smile. At first, I was skeptical, glancing at his youthful face and thinking, he's so young, does he have enough experience? What if my case gets messy? But Frank quickly won me over with logic. Sitting behind a glossy wooden desk, flipping through paperwork, he said confidently, "A case like yours isn't complicated. It's all about who's more persistent. The older lawyers, those with reputation to protect, tend to be conservative and will tell you to settle. It's only people like me, still building a name, who are willing to go all in." I looked into his eyes, steady, sincere, and decided to trust him. Frank flipped through the files quickly, taking notes nonstop, then did some calculations. The result left me stunned. I sat frozen on the soft leather chair, mouth hanging open. No way. We already agreed. Post-divorce, I'd get the 3 houses, worth $1.8 million. Why now? Is it this low? My voice rose furious, my hand lightly hitting the table. Frank adjusted his glasses and calmly explained, pointing at the numbers on paper. You see here, yes, the 1.8 million in property was agreed upon in the divorce, all going to you. But now that your husband's dead, half of that becomes part of his estate. By law, the estate is subject to community property rules, meaning you get 50%, and the rest is split among his children. So your share becomes just 900K. Altogether, you're looking at around 1 million now. I sat there gripping the chair's armrest, my mind spinning. A middle school math teacher, and yet I'd just been blindsided by a grade school level problem. So this was it. Premature celebration? I had assumed that with Brian gone, I, the legal wife, would automatically inherit everything. Besides the 3 houses, I thought I'd be entitled to his company shares, cash in the bank, investments. But when Frank dug deeper, flipping through financials with a serious face, he shook his head. Ms. Hayes, your husband left behind nothing. In fact, he had over $70,000 in credit card debt. I leapt up, face flushed red. That bastard? Of all times to die, he picked the one that cost me hundreds of thousands. My voice echoed in the office, my fists pounding the table, rage rising like a tide. Frank looked at me, voice calm. But have you ever wondered? With someone as calculating as your ex-husband, do you think he really left everything to you so easily? That snapped me awake. You mean, he might have hidden assets? Frank nodded, tapping his pen against the desk. There's an 80 to 90% chance, but tracking it would be hard. Typical tricks include transferring company shares to parents' names, offloading brokerage accounts. Without solid proof, if the other side doesn't admit it, the court likely won't side with us. Unless we can trace the money trail and file for a full investigation. Frank's words triggered something in my memory. Last October, Brian dissolved 2 companies under his name, claiming poor performance. Then he helped his parents register a new company, listed them as owners while he remained the manager, still running it directly but only taking home minimum wage. Come to think of it, wasn't that right around the time Linda got pregnant? He had been laying the groundwork for a fallback plan all along. No wonder he kept yelling about walking away with nothing during the divorce. Not to mention, earlier this year, my in-laws bought a 200-square-meter apartment, saying they made money from stocks. Seriously? Before their trip to Europe, Brian even took them on a tour around Hong Kong and Macau, and when they got back, they bragged to everyone about hitting it big in the casinos. Hitting it big. Big enough to send their own son straight to his grave. Frank looked at me, gently. So, Miss Emily, what number are you expecting? I paused, sat up straighter, and looked him in the eye. Here's the deal. We originally agreed on a 15% cut. I'm bumping it to 20%. However much you help me get back, I win and you win. Just don't talk to me about morals. As long as it's legal, I don't care. Frank adjusted his glasses, smiling, his eyes gleaming with excitement. You said it. I'm already feeling the thrill. A partnership based solely on money. Doesn't that sound more solid than a marriage? The next morning, everything began to shift in the most unexpected way. Frank Douglas, the young lawyer I had once trusted, sent me an email notice canceling our contract. By the weekend, when I went to meet Brian's parents, I found them sitting next to none other than Frank himself, grinning like some sleazy insurance agent scamming the elderly. The first round of negotiation centered around custody of the child. The moment I stepped into the room, Brian's mother, Karen Kane, burst into dramatic sobs, pointing a trembling finger at my face. Emily Hayes, you heartless woman! How dare you cremate Brian without telling us? You murdered my son! She lunged toward me, flailing her arms like she wanted to slap me, her shrill voice echoing through the room. Brian's father, Arthur, sat beside her, pale-faced, clutching the armrests of his chair, muttering, "Karen, calm down!" I stood still, took a deep breath, and said calmly but firmly, "Because I was Brian's legal wife." I had the right to decide. Karen collapsed into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably. On Linda's side, her mother, Martha Thompson, and younger brother Mike had come along. Martha only wept quietly, shaking her head like her world had shattered. I sat in the corner, watching the little performance unfold. Karen wiped her tears with a handkerchief and then spoke, voice soft but calculated. As long as you let us raise the baby, we won't ask for the return of the gifts, the down payment for the house Brian gave, or the wedding gifts, the engagement ring and jewelry set. She glanced at the Thompsons with eyes glittering, half hope, half threat. The Thompsons exchanged looks. Martha's face went pale, and Mike bit his lower lip, eyes darting as he calculated. They were recent immigrants and seemed afraid of losing out, clearly hesitant. Martha whispered to her son, "Mike, what do we do now?" Mike replied, voice shaky but trying to sound bold, tapping the table with his fist. "But the child is also my sister's. Now that both parents are gone, doesn't he have inheritance rights too? If we give up custody, do we lose our share of the estate?" Martha nodded vigorously, tears rolling down again. "Yes, that's right, Mike." Frank cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and said in a smooth yet sharp voice, "Asset division comes with caregiving responsibility. If you want custody of the child, you also need to commit to raising him until adulthood." Mike blinked rapidly, tapping the table, putting on a fake air of confidence. "We can raise him." But raising a child costs money, and it was clear they hadn't thought this through. I glanced at Frank. His eyes sparkled like he was waiting for his moment. Karen scoffed, pointing at Mike. "You? Raise him? Fine. My grandson is in the NICU right now, costing over $1,000 a day. Can you afford that?" Her voice rose, dripping with sarcasm, as she listed expenses with waving hands. Sure enough, the Thompsons started hesitating. Martha lowered her head, clutching her handkerchief tighter, and Mike bit his lip, gaze falling. Finally, after more hushed whispers, they agreed to give up custody, but only if the Kane family promised not to ask for the money Brian had given them before. Both parties reached an initial agreement, and immediately began writing it down, black ink on white paper. Frank reminded them, voice even. This agreement must list all prior expenses in detail. Martha, trembling, began listing everything. A car, a house, a commercial apartment, home appliances, the engagement ring and jewelry set. It all added up to over $2.4 million. The moment the agreement was signed, I stood up, took out my phone, and snapped a photo of the document. Both families froze. Karen reacted first, her face turning red, pointing at me. "Emily, what are you doing? This has nothing to do with you. Why are you taking pictures?" Her voice boomed in fury. I shrugged, calmly sitting back down. "You're asking why this involves me?" I said. "I was Brian's legal wife. During our marriage, he secretly funneled money to another woman and her family. Don't I have the right to demand it back?" The Thompson family immediately panicked. Martha turned white, clutching her chest. "Emily, what do you mean? Didn't we agree no one would ask for it back?" Mike stood up, slamming the table. "This is fraud!" I laughed, shaking my head. "Who agreed? Did I sign anything? Did I say that? Brian's parents said they wouldn't ask for it back, but it's not even their money. As for me, I want my share. Sorry, $2.4 million, right? I suggest you return it quickly before I sue you." The whole room erupted. Karen shrieked, "Emily, have you gone insane over money? Even if you have a point, we can't return that. It's my grandson's inheritance." I squinted, tilted my head with a smirk. "Oh? And where's your grandson now?" Karen's face contorted in rage, flushing bright red like she might explode. "My grandson is Brian's son." "Even if born premature, he's still a person. He has inheritance rights." I smiled, resting my chin on my hand. "Then how will you prove the baby is Brian's?" I pulled out OB/GYN records from my bag, spread them on the table with a crinkle of paper, and pointed to the numbers. "Look here, I had my blood tests and ultrasounds done. Everything came back normal. Brian and I were married for 5 years and had no children. I have grounds to petition the court, questioning whether my late husband was even capable of reproduction. Karen turned pale, her trembling fingers grazing the documents. I continued, voice sharp. So then, how will you prove Linda's child is Brian's? DNA test? Sorry, Brian's already been reduced to ashes. Martha piped up, voice shaking. But maybe from his hair or something from the house. I shook my head and looked straight at them. You want to come to my home to collect hair or traces of his life? I had the whole place deep cleaned and refreshed the day after. Everything's spotless. There's nothing left Frank Douglas, ever the diligent worker, or perhaps loyal to his new clients, immediately sided with Brian's parents. He adjusted his glasses and spoke professionally. Martha, I must warn you about legal risk. If you can't prove the child is Brian's, your family will be required to return all gifted assets. Martha panicked, her face ghostly pale, clutching her chest. What are you saying? Don't make things up, she shouted, trembling. My daughter Linda was a good girl. Ever since she was with Brian, she never saw anyone else. She was waiting for him to finalize the divorce. The child is definitely Brian's. I rested my chin on my hand again, tilted my head, and replied with a mocking smile. Martha, do you want to hear yourself say that again? A good girl, who seduced a married man, got pregnant, and waited for him to divorce his wife. Martha fell silent, her face burning red, her hands clenched around her handkerchief as the tears returned, sobs echoing through the room. I didn't care anymore. I just shrugged, got up from my chair, and turned my back to walk out the door. But later, I found out that under Frank's persuasion, my mother-in-law secretly took samples from both herself and her husband to test their relationship with the baby. What I didn't realize then was that things were about to upend everything I thought I knew. While waiting for the DNA results, I secretly invited Frank out for dinner. We sat across from each other. He cut into his steak with practiced precision, silverware gliding gracefully, while I nibbled at my salad, my voice calm. Thank you for helping orchestrate that little play. If the two families hadn't exposed themselves, I'd never have known just how much money Brian gave his mistress. Frank Douglas smiled, dimples showing, eyes sparkling under the light. This was just the opening act. I thought, exactly, sipping the dark red wine, its tannins clinging to my tongue like a reminder of secrets yet uncovered. Who knows how much Brian had transferred behind my back? Just from the way he so easily gave up the 3 houses, I figured the actual amount had to be double, maybe triple that. But is this really okay? I asked, a little uneasy, setting down my fork and looking straight at Frank. He casually dabbed his mouth with a crisp white napkin and replied, Didn't you say, as long as it's legal, anything goes? I shook my head, voice a bit sharper. I was just saying that. Frank had taken on Brian's parents as clients, yet secretly helped me, an unforgivable sin in the legal profession. The 2 DNA reports arrived simultaneously in Frank's inbox on a stormy morning. He sat in his office, facing 5 people. The baby had a genetic match with Brian's father, Robert Kane, but no match at all with Karen, Brian's mother. Frank read the report again, zooming in on the bolded lines, his voice trembling as he read aloud. The genetic match is 99.6%. Conclusion: Robert Kane is the biological father of the child. Karen went pale as a sheet, collapsing into the living room sofa, clutching her chest and letting out a high-pitched scream. No! No way! Realizing he couldn't hide it anymore, Robert confessed. Brian had azoospermia, 0 sperm count, diagnosed years ago at a friend's clinic. But because Karen desperately wanted a grandchild, Robert hid the truth, afraid she'd fall ill from disappointment. Of course, I, the betrayed wife, was never told. Later, when Brian's company hired a new receptionist, it was Linda, a young woman with a sweet smile from a poor background who used her looks to seduce a married man. But no matter how hard they tried, Linda couldn't get pregnant. So Robert devised a plan. He used massive gift payments to get close to Linda and secretly started sleeping with her. Meanwhile, he gave Brian so-called supplements for months, tricking him into thinking his azoospermia had been cured. He even orchestrated the transfer of Brian's assets into a trust under his own name, all to prepare for his late-in-life son. Robert puffed up his chest and declared loudly, "Even if the child is mine, Brian is gone, but he still has a younger brother." He tried to convince his wife to forgive him and accept the situation. Whether that worked or not, I didn't care. I only cared about one thing. "So, what you're saying is, this child is not Brian's, right? And a younger brother doesn't have legal inheritance rights, correct, Lawyer Frank?" Frank nodded, adjusting his glasses, voice steady. "Correct." After more shouting matches between Robert and Karen, Frank managed to gather all the evidence of assets my husband had fraudulently transferred. 3 months later, my lawsuit reached its verdict. The court ordered a full investigation of Brian Kane's finances and recovered a significant portion of the marital assets he'd tried to hide. In total, I received $4.7 million in compensation. Holding the court ruling in my hand, my heart pounding, I became financially free for half a lifetime in a single moment, walking out of the courthouse with a quiet smile. The divorce papers between Brian's parents still hadn't been approved. As for the baby, he had been in the NICU for 60 days, his tiny body rising and falling under a sheet of glass, racking up over $800,000 in hospital bills, itemized charges for tests, medication, everything. In the end, he survived, let out a weak cry when he was finally held. But his future? I no longer cared. My life had moved on. To a new chapter, a full bank account, and a free heart.